The pre-dawn hours of March 19, 2023, brought violence to the Chimbolo gold mine in the Central African Republic. Gunmen attacked the site, overwhelming security and killing 9 Chinese nationals who had only begun operations days earlier. Immediately following the assault, rebel groups pointed fingers at Russian Wagner group operatives, suggesting a deliberate act of intimidation aimed at deterring Chinese expansion in the country's lucrative mining sector to make way for Moscow's interests. Yet conclusive evidence backing these assertions never materialized, and the perpetrators remain unidentified. Still, the incident casts a sharp light on the intersecting and potentially conflicting paths of Chinese and Russian influence across sub-Saharan Africa. At the heart of the matter lie fundamentally different objectives and operational models. China, Africa's largest single trading partner with bilateral trade reaching $295 billion in 2024, has cultivated ties over decades. Its focus centers on long-term economic integration and investment, exemplified by the continent-spanning Belt and Road Initiative, which encompasses infrastructure projects like the financing or operation of at least 46 African ports. Such vast undertakings necessitate stability. A secure environment is paramount for these investments to yield returns. Russia's engagement, while significantly smaller in economic scale, with $24.5 billion in trade, represents a more recent resurgence dating back to the 2010s. Moscow's approach frequently involves building political alliances, selling arms, and deploying security apparatus, including private military contractors, often within nations grappling with significant insecurity. Its influence is notably pronounced in environments like Mali, the Central African Republic, and Sudan, states marked by fragility and conflict. This operational focus provides defense assistance and regime support, thriving in, or at least navigating effectively through, instability. While both Beijing and Moscow share an interest in diminishing Western influence, creating a basis for parallel action, their core operational requirements diverge sharply. One power seeks stability for its economic ventures, the other leverages insecurity through its security and political engagements. Understanding these distinct approaches is crucial when assessing their interactions across the continent. This fundamental difference in approach creates distinct operational realities on the ground. Beijing's strategy, deeply rooted in the Belt and Road Initiative, involves extensive capital outlay for projects like ports, railways, and mines, assets requiring long-term security and predictable governance to be viable. Consequently, widespread instability directly threatens the foundation of China's economic engagement model. Events like the Chimbolo mine attack, regardless of the perpetrator's identity, underscore the vulnerability of such fixed, long-term investments when security deteriorates. Moscow's activities, conversely, often find fertile ground precisely in those regions experiencing fragility. The provision of defense assistance, arms sales, and the deployment of security contractors becomes a valuable commodity for states facing internal conflict or existential threats to their leadership, as observed in Mali, the Central African Republic, and Sudan. This model allows Russia to cultivate political influence and secure access, sometimes to resources, by addressing the immediate security deficits that might deter large-scale economic investors like China. Therefore, what constitutes a critical risk for Chinese interests, namely instability, can simultaneously represent an operational opportunity for Russia's distinct security-centric engagement. This does not necessarily imply direct antagonism, but it highlights a structural tension. Where Chinese economic zones overlap with areas experiencing the type of insecurity that attracts Russian security solutions, the potential for unintended friction emerges. Actions taken within the framework of Russia's security operations could inadvertently disrupt the stable conditions China requires. Despite these differing operational logics, both powers maintain a shared strategic objective: the reduction of Western influence on the continent. This common geopolitical aim has historically provided a framework for coexistence, allowing divergent interests to proceed in parallel without escalating into overt competition. The crucial factor remains whether this overarching strategic alignment continues to supersede the potential for localized operational clashes stemming from their fundamentally different approaches to stability and security in Africa. However, looking beyond this shared geopolitical objective reveals stark contrasts in the potential long-term consequences of their respective approaches. The sheer scale of Chinese economic involvement, dwarfing Russia's footprint, implies a different order of vulnerability. Beijing has far more substantial fixed assets and financial commitments at stake across the continent, making widespread or prolonged instability a significantly greater strategic liability for its interests compared to Moscow's more compartmentalized engagements. Conversely, Russia's reliance on security provision and political alignment within volatile states carries its own distinct risks. Entanglement in protracted internal conflicts, the potential failure of supported regimes, or blowback from controversial security operations can damage Moscow's credibility as a reliable partner and potentially draw it deeper into complex local disputes. This divergence also shapes how African states may perceive and interact with each power. Engagement with China often revolves around economic development opportunities, infrastructure financing, and trade, albeit accompanied by discussions around debt sustainability and labor practices. Interaction with Russia, particularly in fragile states, centers more directly on security guarantees, military hardware, and political survival, raising different sets of considerations regarding sovereignty and intervention. The Chimbolo mine attack, while its origins remain obscure, serves as a potent illustration of these dynamics intersecting. It highlights the physical risks to Chinese personnel and investments in areas where security is contested, the very type of environment where Russian security actors are often present, leading to complex, sometimes ambiguous, situations on the ground. The incident exemplifies the potential flashpoints arising not necessarily from direct intent, but from the inherent friction between a model predicated on stability and one operating within, and sometimes benefiting from, its absence. Delving further into this dynamic requires acknowledging the inherent complexities of operating environments characterized by multiple armed groups and contested governance. The lack of clear attribution for the Chimbolo mine attack is instructive. It highlights the difficulty in definitively assigning responsibility when violence occurs in such contexts. Actions undertaken by local factions, rebels, or even criminal elements might inadvertently align with or appear to serve the interests of one external power over another, even without direct coordination or intent. This ambiguity creates space for misinterpretation and suspicion, complicating direct state-to-state relations between Beijing and Moscow regarding their African activities. Furthermore, the asymmetry in presence and investment levels shapes potential responses. China's vast economic network across nearly all African nations means its strategic calculus must account for continent-wide stability trends and the security of widespread assets and personnel. Russia's engagement, concentrated in specific security hotspots, allows for a more focused application of its distinct tools, military advisors, arms, political backing, tailored to localized crises. This difference implies that disruptions in one volatile state, while potentially beneficial or manageable for Russia's specific objectives there, could have far-reaching negative consequences for China's broader economic strategy dependent on regional calm and secure trade routes. Therefore, while the shared goal of countering Western influence provides a strategic ceiling against overt confrontation, it does not eliminate the possibility of friction at the operational level. The practical realities of pursuing divergent goals in overlapping geographical spaces, particularly where stability is fragile, inherently carry the potential for incidents that test this broader geopolitical alignment. The trajectory of their interaction hinges on how both powers manage these localized tensions against their shared strategic imperatives. Considering the wider implications, this dual presence presents African states with a complex geopolitical landscape. Governments seeking large-scale infrastructure development and economic integration may find China's Belt and Road Initiative framework more aligned with their long-term aspirations. Conversely, regimes facing immediate security threats or political instability might prioritize the security assistance and political backing offered by Moscow, even if it comes without the extensive economic investment characteristic of Beijing's approach. This creates a situation where African nations may engage selectively with both powers based on specific needs, navigating the distinct advantages and potential drawbacks each relationship entails. The interaction is not merely bilateral between Moscow and Beijing. It unfolds within the sovereign decisions and strategic calculations of numerous African countries. The long-term effect on continental stability remains an open question. While China's investments ideally foster conditions conducive to peace and development, the effectiveness of Russia's security interventions in achieving sustainable stability is subject to ongoing observation in states like Mali and the Central African Republic. A scenario where short-term security fixes provided by one power inadvertently undermine the long-term stable environment required by the other cannot be discounted, particularly in resource-rich regions attractive to both. Ultimately, the relationship between Chinese and Russian activities in Africa operates on multiple levels. There is the overarching geopolitical alignment against perceived Western dominance, the distinct operational models tailored to different objectives and environments, and the localized interactions where these differing approaches physically intersect, sometimes under conditions of considerable ambiguity, as the unresolved Chimbolo incident exemplifies. The potential for friction stems not necessarily from inherent rivalry, but from the fundamentally different prerequisites and consequences of their respective strategies on the ground. Therefore, the African landscape accommodates two major external actors pursuing distinct paths rooted in fundamentally different operational philosophies. One power invests heavily in economic structures that depend intrinsically on predictability and peace for their success. The other engages primarily through political and security mechanisms, often finding its relevance amplified within environments marked by conflict and weak state capacity. This inherent divergence, stability as a prerequisite versus instability as an operational theater, defines their interaction more profoundly than any assumption of direct rivalry. While their shared objective of recalibrating global influence provides a strategic buffer against open collision, it does not negate the potential for friction where these contrasting approaches converge geographically. Incidents like the Chimbolo attack, regardless of final attribution, highlight the vulnerability points created by this dynamic. Consequently, the relationship is characterized less by an impending clash and more by a complex coexistence, where parallel actions and divergent methods unfold against a backdrop of shared geopolitical aims, leaving the ultimate balance contingent on localized realities and the management of fundamentally different strategic needs on the continent. Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed this analysis, and be sure to give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button for more geopolitical insights like this. I love hearing your thoughts, so drop a comment below and let's keep the conversation going. Share this video with anyone interested in deeper perspectives on current events. Until next time, stay informed and think critically. Thank you.